So now as we go into the controls, you can see that I have it highlighted on aircraft up in the top left, and what I've found is that for control mode I use mouse aim, and then I have the virtual instructor turned on. Hover mode, I don't even know what it is, but I just have a little wireless, keyboard that I have attached to my PlayStation. For any kind of obscure control, I'll usually just denote a letter that kind of sticks with it, so H for hover mode. I still keep J as J out, but now when you come down here, since I don't actually have a mouse, I just put none for the mouse wheel, and then I have it at 70% for the multiplier. I find it gives me pretty quick throttle response. Because most of the time if you're cutting throttle, you're going from WEP to 0, and so you want to do it pretty quick, but there are instances that you want to be able to just knock it down a couple percent. So I'll show you that right here. So say I want to go to 90%, or 92, so it doesn't overheat. It's touchy and fast, but it's also not so sensitive that you can't just grab a couple percent when you need it. So back into the controls, I use throttle axis and I use right stick up and down. I don't have it set for holding the throttle for WEP, because most of the time, I'm just going to be climbing. So when you back out, I just hit the controller up, lock it into WEP, and then I can kind of look around and do other things, and it will just stay in WEP. For roll axis, I also like to use the right stick and left and right, and that's what actually pitches my plane. But let me show you something in here. I gave it a little bit of a dead zone of 0.05 because if you have it set too high, it won't roll your plane. Like, it's the dead zone in your stick that it'll, because if you have that too high and you don't have any dead zone, any vertical movement of your controller will also affect your throttle. So if you're just, if you're really in the midst of a battle and you're trying to roll the plane left and right, we'll just hit add for any of these setting changes. Now, here's the big one, yaw. So I have it where the L1 button is the left elevator or left rudder, and then R1 is right. So I'll show you what that does here once I get straightened out. So I'm just flying straight. Let me drop all these bombs and rockets real quick. So what L1 does is move the rudder left, and then R yaws it to the right. So this helps substantially when you're doing stuff like this, where you're about ready to stall, and then you want to kick it over. And I'm using the right joystick to kind of do the controls, but it just kind of helps you move and maneuver the plane how you want it to. So that's what R1 does, and L1 does that. Now, pitch axis, that is the toughest one, and this took me a long time to figure out the best way that I like to have it set up. So if we go in here, you'll see for the maximum value, which that's if your elevator goes, wants to push the plane up, and then the minimum value is if you want the plane to go down. So you'll see I have the minimum value, but it also has the up button. So, and I don't have any dead zone on this. So if any time I press R1 and L1 together, it immediately goes to the maximum value. And you don't have to do the enable axis or anything, but I have the multiplier on there just to make sure that the response time of when I tell it to go elevator up or down, it does it. So I'll show you an example. So if I press R1 and L1 at the same time, my plane will just pitch up. And then let me roll it over here, and if I'm upside down and I hit the R1, L1, it will bank hard. Now, if I press up L1 down R1, it will pitch down. And it's easy to reach too. So if I'm like rolling and I need to pitch up like this to do a little neg G to like dodge the head on, I can do that. And so this is usually what I will use more often than just using the mouse, because as you can see, if I just use the mouse, it's not as aggressive. But if I hit that elevator, you see that sharp increase in the turning performance. So I'll still follow the circle, but I also hit R1 and L1 to do it. And it just worked fantastic for me. So as we go down the controls, yaw axis, we already kind of covered that. Thrust vector, that has to do, the only time I've ever used it is on a Harrier in a test flight. But essentially what that does is, on my little keyboard, you can turn the thrust vector from 0 to 100%. So it's either nozzles down or nozzles straight back. That's all it is. And then hover is just for, helicopters and stuff. And I just have that to the left, right buttons on the keyboard. Invert, that's only if you need it. If you like it inverted, I don't. You just figure that out on your own, whichever you prefer. And you just switch it on and off and it works. I don't even have any swept wing aircraft, so don't worry about that. But for and boosters, I use my keyboard, just B for boosters. It's really only ever used on like the Kika, or if you have one of the ME 262s that has the boosters on the back, I use that to just turn them on or off. Flaps, I always do with the right button. And now there are different types of flaps. There's landing, combat, or takeoff. So for example, if I just turn the flaps on, it goes to combat right away. And if I hit it again, it goes to raise. But if you try to drop your landing gear, what'll happen is then when you hit it, it goes to landing. And then you just pop the landing gears back up. But this is what you should use, if you really need that extra bit of lift. And then if you hit it again, it goes to combat. Then one more, it'll go back to between raised and combat. So I lost my flap there, sorry about that. So then for air brake, I use the left D-pad. I got an air brake extended, so I just hit left to turn it on, right or left on it again to turn it off, and then that's fine. Drag shoot, I use the left and then the X button. Usually it automatically deploys, so you don't even have to worry about it. For gear, since I kind of do that frequently and I don't always have my keyboard charged, I have it set to where if I hit the down button and the circle button at the same time, it will pop it out. Thrust reversal, you don't need that except for if you have like one of the Saab planes like the SK-60, because when you land, you just increase the throttle and then it will thrust reverse it, so it slows you down. So for weaponry, I usually do R2, and then I will sometimes use R3, so you push in the right joystick to do it. And then additional guns is R2. It really depends on what plane you have, which ones you like to use. So for example, I'll go to my hangar and grab a plane that will actually utilize the different gun modes. Like, for example, like a BF-109 or, something that has two different calibers of guns. So like on a P-47, it doesn't matter. They're all 50 cal, so just put everything for R2 and you'll be good to go. But sometimes it matters on, you know, different planes. So for example, I'll show you a good one. Like the HC219A7. It has 3 different types of guns. So it's got MK108s, then it has the armor piercing MK103s, and then the 220 millimeters. So what we'll do is I'll go to test flight and say we want, I'll just go universal on the other 2. Then we'll hit OK. But essentially what it is like for this plane, the MK103 is the armor piercing. Like that's the one that you can really take care of ground targets for, heavy tanks. You can use it in ground RB. But then the other rounds, they don't have as much penetration, so you don't want them. Like, see, right now it's all R2, so everything will shoot. But then I have it set for heavy guns to be R3, so you can separate them. But for these, I know that we want to do large caliber guns as R2, and then the additional guns as R3. So let me get this bad boy taken off here. And so then it'll be all the heavy hitting like anti-aircrafts up, and then there's the MK103 that, you know, is actually the one you'll be using. So right now I'm using my R1 and L1 to bring it up. I can use R2 to kind of kick it out, or R1 to kick it out. And then if I aim, I want to hit him with the armor piercing stuff. But he's still a tank, so we'll have to hit him in the back. But I mean, you know, that's how I like to split up the guns. If I have smaller caliber guns, I always put them on R2. And then for something like this, you know, I'll use R3 because it's kind of my specialty ammo. I'll hit that tree. Oh. But anyway, that's how I like to split the guns. You can have them just all set to R2 and they'll all shoot together. So for Hangar Bay, that only matters if you have a bomb, but I use down button and then triangle, and then it opens my bomb bay doors. Bombs and rockets, usually I have them as my push in my left joystick. If you have bombs and rockets strapped, so say on like that P-47, what I would have done was had all my guns shooting for R2. I would have had drop bombs as L3 and then rockets as R3, because it's the special caliber that, you know, weapon that I'm trying to use. So that's how I set that up. And then for missiles, I just have it all set to L3. Weapon lock is basically just the X button to pick your whatever you want to lock onto. Countermeasures, up and square. So the yaw axis for aimed weapons and the pitch axis for aimed weapons is like if you go into gunner mode, you know, you're going to be using the right stick to aim, you know, when you're in like a different, you know, when you're looking around and stuff. So I like to have it as the right joystick. You can use left, it's okay. It's whatever you prefer. And then for all the radar stuff, I have different buttons on my keyboard set up for that. And then reload I have is R, or if I have like ballistic computer, I use B for either cannons or rockets. It doesn't really matter. Don't even need all of this other stuff. I never had to use it at all. So yeah, now we're in gunner axis control. Up and down will be the Y, left and right will be X. So when you hit triangle, you know, and switch to your gunners on like say a bomber, you'll use the right joystick to steer it while you can still use the left stick on your bomber to like move it around and things. So sensitivity, I like to have it high at 95%. So because when you go into the bomber, you don't want to slowly move your camera around to actually engage someone. You want it to be quick. I turn down the sensitivity though when I hit square to zoom in, and that gives me the precision I need. And then on this, I had to actually invert it because it was acting, it was the opposite of what I want. So you have to play with it. Camera control, triangle just moves me from the different positions, like cockpit, just the grid view, and then back to cockpit. So I just use triangle for that. We're going to go here. So for the actual aiming on enemies and things like that, I use L2. And then tracking aim axis, I use L2 as well. And I have a little bit of a dead zone, and then I just kind of left everything else stock. So let me hop into a plane and I'll show you how that actually will work. Because on test flights, you have to fly into certain planes to actually have aerial targets to shoot at. So give me just a second and I'll show you the rest of it. So I know for a fact, if I fly a German jet, so say, yeah, we're just gonna make 19. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to go to controls, because they all have the same caliber. I'll just use R2 for everything. And then what we want to do is we want to come down here to tracking, and that's how I have that set up. And then zoom, I have the square button. So all I do is I basically just hit square in, it zooms out, hit square, zooms, back in. So let me take off. And then see, there's a MiG-15. So the way that I like to have the viewing around set up is anytime I want to look around, I will hit the down button and then I'll use the right stick to look around. So this is how I have it set up. And you want to have the down button as the enable axis. Now, you don't need to do anything with like the maximum value or the reset, because it only works when you have the down button held down and are using the joystick. Once you let go of the down button, it just snaps back to the front. So, and then same thing with Y. That'll be your up down, but that's the most important one for looking around. So what I'll do is I'll get taken off. See, it just lets you look all the way around, but it doesn't actually affect your plane's trajectory in any way. So gear up, flaps up, and then if you hold L2, it'll kind of zoom in a bit, and then it'll lock on. But you can also hit square at any time to zoom in as far as you can. So say, but if you hold L2, it'll zoom in, but you can use the R1 to like yaw your plane, or use it to do, so that's, how I actually keep a good eye on people, is I hold L2, but then if I'm like in a dogfight, I'll use my other L1 and R1 combos to actually position my plane how I want it. And so I'm not holding L2 right now. He's locked on because I hit X on him, but now what I can do is I can actually go in there and zoom on him, and then, get locked in. Or I can hold, but here, I'll just use the elevator, and I'll come up around him. There he is. And that's how I use it to control the plane, like when I'm in a dogfight or something. Let me Go down here to camera control. There we go. So that's how I track. And then for smoke, you can do whatever you want. I mean, like, I guess I could turn on my little thing and then go shoot. Let's see what M is. Yeah, M for smoke or mo. Cockpit lighting, that I have that as the X and the circle button at the same time. So like on night maps, if you're in the cockpit, you can hit X and circle to turn on your lights and everything. But I only do that on night maps because people can actually see your cockpit lights on, so you don't really want that. The radio menu is just for like, so say, you know, you want to do communication, like the little, like cover me or, you know, stuff like that. You can set that up, but I don't really ever do it because I have a keyboard and I just type the message. So for acceleration, I usually have about 60%, and then I have about a 5% delay. You can turn your engine on and off with the manual engine control, or feather a prop. So say if one of your engines gets shot out and it's just not spinning anymore, but your others is, you can hit F and feather the prop that isn't working, and it actually has gotten me home a couple times. I turn off all the auto control because I have the buttons all set up. I can tell it what to do. So that's essentially how I have it all set up. Let me try to find that MIG. Oop. I broke my flaps. And I got passed out. So let me get my air brake on here. Alright, air brake's off. And then also for options, when you're in options, you can always set like your, you know, your gun convergence and everything. And I never use vertical targeting. So let me pop into a plane here that shows you how I like to do the vertical targeting. And then I think that'll be about the end of the guide for showing you how I have my stuff all set up. And hopefully it helps. But for vertical targeting, all of the bullets will arch out, you know, and then fall down at range. And the heavier ones have less, you know, velocity, so they tend to drop more. And it's especially, you know, something you want to set up for like gun convergence. Usually I use 500. You can use less, like go to 400, I would think. If you have like wing mounted guns and you're like in a P-51, 400 will work, but I like 500 because it gives you more range for head-ons, but it's also close enough that, you know, if you're following someone and you're on their 6, most of your rounds are going to be pelting them. So we'll just go with like, say, a G6, which is my favorite plane in the game, by the way, because it looks cool. But what we'll do is we'll go to options, we'll go to common battle settings. You want to turn it 500 vertical targeting off. So I'll take this for a test flight and I'll show you how I like to have it all set up here. So I'm going to take the tracers off. We'll just go immediate. I'll just put tracers on. And then we'll go with universal for the 30s. And we'll head in and I'll just shoot down some of the bombers, but I'll show you how I use the vertical targeting and why. So let me get that roll in. Go to controls, and I want to put the heavy cannon, the large caliber guns, on my R3. And then I'll just keep the smaller caliber guns on R2. So that way, just my machine guns, cannons. And so that way, because it means 65 rounds of cannon, that goes pretty quick if you have it all set up to R2. And sometimes I'll just shoot my machine guns and things like that in a head-on, so I'm not wasting my cannons, because I'm just trying to scare them off course. Or if I want someone to turn so I can catch them, I'll just shoot at them with my machine guns, but save this for the killing blow. But let me get on these bombers real quick here. And I'll do pitch, and then put on combat, and I'll let go of my elevators, and then just let the plane kind of setting itself out. Alright, so once I get on the back of these guys, after they finish this turn, I'll be able to kind of show you. Alright, so when you zoom in, you've got the cannons, and they kind of will want to meet that thing at 500 meters. But when you're shooting with cannons, they are going to be like a lot lower below the gun. See how it's dropping? But since I know that, I can compensate for it and shoot a little higher. And kind of lob them in. See, those are all hits, but I still have to aim a little bit because he's more than 500. I think it's just the 30s don't have the range, so. I'll lob these in. There you go. And see, as you get closer, you kind of have to aim above, or like a little lower. See, and I just find it adds a lot more consistency to my aiming. I've just gotten good with it that way. But that's essentially all of the controls. Hopefully this has been helpful and will, give you a lot better fighting chance. Well, until next time, I'll see you guys later.